would be needed to address in order to meet the standards and as well as close the achievement gaps that Dr. Johnson mentioned. What we've done this year is under the differentiated accountability, we have certain areas of expectations for which we have to meet as a district and for our schools. And we implemented what we call curriculum frameworks. And the frameworks are developed based on scope and sequences, which basically take the objectives that the students have to learn by a given year, and they pace them out so that all of our students across the district are able to ensure that the teachers are exposing them as well as deeply teaching them for understanding. We also implemented a closed-loop instructional process where the teachers teach what is written to be taught based on the standards we receive from the state, and they also assess it to determine whether the students have mastered it, and if they did, do they need enrichment and acceleration, or do they need intervention if they have not. Then we have opportunities within our scope and sequence for that reteaching and enrichment, which we call in Palm Beach County the RRE days. And some of the parents are familiar with that because in their schools it takes place. And right after the assessment of what has been taught, the students are provided the opportunity for enrichment or reteaching of those skills to make sure that we maintain them. Another thing that we've done is we've done just-in-time professional development for our teachers to ensure that not only did they receive training on how the curriculum frameworks are going to take place during the summer, but also we have our services at the school and from the district that are supporting that.
We're hearing, though, from a lot of parents that their children are just taking too many tests. Do you agree with that?
No, I do not. I think that the assessment process is a very clear one. Instruction needs assessment in order to ensure that the students are mastering those skills. I think that we need to make sure that we understand that these are not additional assessments. These are part of the instructional process in the classroom. When you teach, you have to assess anyway as a teacher to make sure that what you have taught has actually reached the child. Remember that teaching in the absence of learning is a problem. So we need to make sure that the teaching that takes place is addressing the students' learning styles, and in turn, their learning is being monitored.
Randy, I'd like to weigh on that if it's okay just to speak openly to these questions. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the key here is that assessment needs to drive instruction. I mean, you recently editorialized on that very well. And when I go back 50 years when I was in school, we had daily quizzes, we had weekly and chapter tests on Fridays, we had unit tests very periodically. And if you ask a teacher, well, do you measure what you test? They'll all say yes. So the question is not who's giving the, not whether you give tests, but who's giving it. In this particular case, because the Sunshine State standards are required of all students, the only way that the teacher can be assured and we can be assured that that's being taught is to have a reasonable number of assessments to determine that. And I don't think that when you look at every 3 weeks in a 30-week period, 10 times a year is unreasonable.
We have some questions that came in through readers, and so one of the questions that was interesting to us is, what the reader wrote is, it's hard to believe you did not anticipate such widespread opposition to this plan. Why did you not have town hall meetings to explain the process, or at least implement a pilot program at pre-selected schools?
Well, I think, again, I turn to this headline that I saw in the paper this morning, that math tests are stagnating in this country for 4th grade students, and we have a call to action by the Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan. Is it a question of whether we do this, or is it a question of when we do it, or is it a question of how we do it? I would like to think that in a school district, and a reminder that Florida is the 4th largest state in the country. Over half of the students in the state of Florida attend school in one of the urban sevens: Broward, Dade, Palm Beach, Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Orange. Palm Beach County is the only A-rated urban district for 5 consecutive years in every one of the subcells: math, reading, writing, science, gains in math, gains in reading, lower 25% in math, lower 20% in reading. We dominate the state of Florida. We have been at this now for a decade, and I believe that there's a high degree of confidence in Palm Beach County for being able to move student achievement. What has become very clear to us, and this has been discussed over the last couple of years with the visits of the Gates Foundation, the Council of Great City Schools, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, and the Council of Great City Schools, is that Palm Beach County needs to become more of a national standing in what we're doing with our students. So the imperative, I think, is there. We pick up the paper every day, we watch the national news every night, and we see the same thing. United States students are not where they need to be. So I don't think the question, and when I've not heard this, that anybody says, well, we shouldn't be about the business of improving the performance of our students. I think right now what you have is some disagreement on how we are doing that, and I don't know that town hall meetings would change that. I also think that sometimes the issue of, well, you haven't communicated is really just a proxy for dissent on what we are doing.
Are you saying then, Dr. Johnson, that opposition to what you and Mr. Hernandez are doing is driven somehow by people not wanting students to succeed?
I think you have individuals, Randy, who have made it very clear that their school is just fine. And I've heard this in not town hall meetings, but in school meetings in which they've said, you know, this is an A school. Our students are performing at a very high level. Just move to the next school.
And why aren't they right?
Well, because, and I'll give you a classic example without naming the school. In that particular school, you have 30% of the students, and this would be arguably one of the highest performing high schools we have in the county, who aren't reading on grade level.
Why don't you give us the name of the high school?
Spanish River High School.
Your old high school?
Yes.
Well, if that's happening, you know, our understanding is that last week you decided to back off.
Yes.
Well, then why did you back off? What are the consequences of backing off?
I don't like that decision, but I think it was a practical short-term decision because there was a reasonable option. It's not the best option, but it works. The use of embedded assessments, again, assessment drives instruction, was a way for us to make sure that the assessments were valid, that they were reliable, that they were sociometrically accurate, and that they included the past, present, and next generational standards, which our assessments do. Now, if we turn that over to the school, that's not to say that they can't come up with a reasonable assessment. And we've asked them, because we're providing them with training to do that. In some of the schools already that have been given the option between using the district assessments and doing the school assessments, they've said, geez, we'll just go ahead and do the district assessments because that's a whole lot easier than us going out and creating our own. In the continuous improvement model, which is required in the state for differentiated accountability, we're a district in corrective action because of that. You have to use that model, and part of the model is that you have to use these formative assessments.
You just use some pretty jargony terms there. What is the differentiated?
Well, differentiated is, there are, not to get too far afield, but there are 4 major initiatives that are driving reform today. One is No Child Left Behind, which is coming to fruition in 2014. The second is the next generational standards, which are coming down from the feds. The third is the high school reform model here in the state of Florida, which is moving from simply FCAT to the use of graduation rate, advanced placement, et cetera. And that's increased from 800 points to 1,600 points per school. And the last is differentiated accountability. What differentiated accountability does is take the state A+ plan, which is largely a proficiency model, and it pulls in the adequate yearly progress, AYP, from the feds, which is a gain model, and it assigns schools to various tiers based on whether or not they have made adequate yearly progress, learning gains, value added with their students over time. And of course, the students are broken down into race and also to academic groups such as white, Hispanic, black, exceptional child, the language deficient students, poverty, and so on. In Palm Beach County, for example, in our 60 secondary schools, we only have 2 schools that meet AYP. As a district, we do not meet AYP. None of the districts in the state of Florida meet AYP. So we, as a state, we have a long way to go where the federal standards are concerned. So having said all that, the assessments are something that we need to have in place, to make sure that our students are learning, the required standards. And to the extent that we would give a school the latitude to create their own standards, their own assessments rather, I'm comfortable with that, although I guess the proof will be in the pudding.
Mr. Hernandez, can you give us your thoughts on that same subject about whether you think that some of the disagreement at some schools over these changes amounts to what Dr. Johnson, I believe, would describe as a bit of complacency or self-satisfaction?
Well, first of all, I think that the disagreements in some cases have been due to the fact that during the summer we were not able to reach a lot of individuals with regards to communicating the information to the parents so that they had a clear understanding of what they were going to find in August. We attempted to communicate through our schools and their respective principals to their communities, but during the summer a lot of people were on vacation, and for that we totally understand that a lot of individuals came back in August and found themselves with things that they might not have had a clear understanding on. I think as we've made every attempt in the last couple of weeks to be able to be out there with the community, trying to provide them with the information, Dr. Johnson has done a great job of sending letters to the community, and we take it every opportunity with the media, which you have been a great advocate of providing the information to the community. I think that more and more people are understanding the expectation that we have from the federal government and the state government and how we're meeting the needs of the students. Because even though we use data to drive instruction and the statistics are what guides our support for the students, it's not about the data or the statistics. It's about how we're helping and meeting the needs of the student individually as a child. Because we know that if the child is not reading and meeting the standards that they need, every year we have students retained because they're not meeting those standards. Every year we have students that walk across the stage of a graduation that don't get their diploma because they have not met the standards that the state has stipulated. So it's very, very important that as an educational institution, we meet those needs of the student.
Let's go back then. Imagine it's mid-May, before the end of last school year. What would you say to the parents and teachers in this district about the changes you're going to be starting, and what would you have said to make them, in your mind, understand more of what you're trying to accomplish?
Let me go ahead and take a shot at that, because
Well, if I could,
certainly.
you're the one who seems to be most identified with the new policy, so I'd like to hear it from you.
Well, first of all, you know that in every district, the superintendent sets the tone for the expectation. And I got to this district on May 4th was my first day, and Dr. Johnson had a mission for what he wanted academically to take place in this district. First, we needed to meet the standards we were required by the state and by the federal government, but most importantly, meet the needs of the students. We wanted to take our district mastering the state accountability and move them into the No Child Left Behind accountability to make sure that our students were getting their needs met. Second, because of the timing coming in May, the first thing that we had to do was make sure we had every resource available to open school in August to meet the needs of the students, of the teachers, and also meet the needs of us as a district and a community. If we had to go back to May, we would then immediately at that point start deploying information with regards to the guidelines. We did it every Wednesday at the board meeting. Every Wednesday since we came on board in May, we've done an academic update where we've been providing the public through the television via the board workshops and board meetings all of the expectations that we were receiving. As a matter of fact, we not only provided them the expectations, but as changes came, we continuously updated the public and the board as to what was taking place, so that in turn, that would be a catalyst of information.
Do you think at this point it's fair to say that you didn't do an adequate job?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, first of all, I apologize to the community, of which I've been a part for 30 years, that we've pushed hard and we have not been able to communicate this message better than we have. Mm-hmm. I do not apologize for the fact that we are setting high expectations for all of our students, and I do disagree with some of my citizen friends in the belief that our students don't all need to be pushed to higher levels. We do have, and we're very fortunate, schools that are rated A. I mean, that's the case in point, because there's no reason for that in a school of that characteristic. So it's, the communication, sure, it could have been better. That's, in my mind right now, that's kind of a coulda, shoulda, woulda. We are where we are. We have a problem. We have the Secretary of Education and the President doing a call to action. I sometimes feel like here we're almost doing a call to inaction. And the reality is that if we're going to compete internationally, we have to really get serious about public education.
Well, let's go back to.
Well, one of the things I was wondering about is, you talk about there being this perception in the community that things are going very well. And I'm wondering if you think that you're any part of that perception. I mean,
yes.
when I went to board meetings for years, you talked about these charts that you just
Absolutely.
showed. Okay.
I think that's a fair assessment and maybe even a fair criticism. I have been of a mind as a superintendent to brag on our successes of the system. And to hold up this chart that in every academic cell of the state accountability system, which represents over half of the students in the state of Florida, that we're ranked #1 in the state. I think that's something for all of us to be proud of. But on the same notion, now here's our graduation, which has risen 22% in 10 years, from 58 to 80%. But guess what? About 90% of our white students are graduating and about 60% of our African Americans, so that's a 30% margin. Now, clearly that affects some schools more than others, but nevertheless, it is the challenge of a school system.
But it almost seems like you guys woke up this school year and said, all of these things that we've been doing so well, there's underlying data that says there are other things we aren't doing well, and we're going to do something about it now.
I think that all politics are local, and the politics of education have been that they've been state-driven. And in the state of Florida, that's been the A+ plan. It has not been the federal No Child Left Behind adequate yearly progress, because those two programs are being integrated at this point, and our state differentiated accountability that I talked about earlier pulls in the adequate yearly progress as one of the primary pieces of the success for differentiated accountability that carries some huge, huge hammers. In other words, we had John F. Kennedy last year was an intervened status.
John F. Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy, what did I say?
You said John F. Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy Middle School was an intervened status. It faced the sanctions of potentially being closed, meaning dispersing all the students, turned over to a private school, or chartered. And I just did not think any of those were acceptable. With the assistance of Mr. Hernandez, who was then the regional director, and he had all of the intervened schools in South Florida, and Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, moved every one of them up, which speaks to his large-scale reform experience and accomplishments. He was able to not only move that out of the intervened status, but completely out of it to the highest level that it didn't even have to go into transition. We now have Lake Worth High School. The prospect of Lake Worth High School, which is a diverse school, it has schools from all over the county, being closed because we don't get it out of intervened status is something that to me is simply unacceptable. Now granted, not all schools are in intervened status, but the level just above intervene is called Correct 2. We have 30 high schools in Correct 2, and many of those high schools are prestigious high schools. But because of the focus that we've had as a system, maybe the superintendent's to blame because we're focused on A+ and we weren't focused on the federal standards, is where we are right now. But there's no question that we're farther ahead than anyone else in the state. To the issue of communication and noise, one of our board members went to the Greater Florida Consortium, which consists of all of the school districts from Indian River around the hub up to Pinellas County. And when she posed the questions to the other school boards that were there, what are you doing about it? Basically, the answer she got was, we're not doing anything. The administration hasn't even informed us of it. Then 3 weeks ago, I go to a meeting in Tallahassee with the commissioner and with the chancellor, and there's about 20 superintendents, and quite honestly, a lot of them are in denial up there. A lot of them are taking the attitude of, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chancellor, just make this go away. Well, it's not going away. I mean,
Just to be clear here, is what you did at JFK what you're doing now at other schools?
Yes, correct.
You gave the embedded assessments, you gave the frequent tests, and so you know that worked at JFK, and now you're trying to...
Yeah, but let me take that a step farther. We have always assessed. We started off years ago using the diagnostics, which were given 3 times a year, and basically every 9 weeks, if you will, leading up to the FCAT. But that type of infrequent assessment is not enough to give real-time adjustments to students and teachers in the classroom. Then we went to common assessments, which were paper and pencil. And when we brought in Princeton Review, we started to be able to computerize those. This year, the natural transition of that was to go to embedded assessments. You could have called them anything you wanted. You could have called them common assessments. They just now happen to be computerized. But the beauty of what we're doing right now is that when you sit down as a student and you take your embedded assessment, you get,
otherwise known as a test,
a quiz. You get instantaneous knowledge of how you've done. It's reliable, it's valid, it's sociometrically accurate. It covers the old standards, the current standards, and the next generational standards. And so part of the problem in a classroom where a teacher has a group of students who are all making A's and they take the embedded assessment and the student gets, gets 60%, and they go home to the parent and the parent calls the teacher and says, what's going on? I've got a student that's making A's and B's. They're making 100 and that doing this test. Well, you've got next generational standards in there. We're trying to figure out where the kids are at the beginning of the year so that we can teach them up. The whole point of an embedded assessment, is that it's formative. It's not summative in terms of what they've done. It's not evaluative. It's not designed for them to get a grade on that, for the teacher to assign that to the student. It's really to find out where the students are relative to the standards so that we can prepare the appropriate instruction to teach them.
Let's go back to some other people questions.
Okay, one of the questions that's come up, and you sort of touched on this, is with the notion of the state and federal accountability coming together, that there are new requirements and new schools that are part of the system. But I do still get the question from people who say, okay, but there are 40 schools who've met the federal benchmark, who've been told all along they're doing well. They're typically, A, B schools. Even the State Department of Ed says the reform program that you've undertaken does not have to be applied to those schools. So why do that?
Well, those we would consider to be non-differentiated accountability schools, and we have, 30 or 40 of them, and half of them, which we've published the chart, are one step to going back into differentiated accountability because they've already failed to meet AYP, adequate yearly progress, by 1 year. So obviously with those schools, we don't want to take a chance that they could slip back. And I will tell you that as a system, we've slipped. We had 40% of our schools just a few years ago that met adequate yearly progress, and they have actually backslid to where we only have 24% right now because, again, that has not been the focus of our system. So we have a high mobility system, both in students and teachers, and if you create a two-class system where you have the schools that are in and the schools that are out, I think that it's going to be very difficult for us as a system to provide the resources, the training, the materials, the assessments that are necessary for us to ensure that all of our students are properly educated and all our teachers are properly trained. Do you want to add anything to that, Mr. Hernandez?
Well, I would say that, first of all, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the standards in the No Child Left Behind, but the expectation of on-grade level students increases every year, which means that in 2014, it's...
Excuse me, does that mean that you have to have a higher percentage each year?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So, for example, in 2014, the expectation is obviously that 100% will be on grade level from the No Child Left Behind. But what they've done is, since it started, every year they increase the percentage, which means you could very well be a school that has met adequate yearly progress this year based on the expectation at that particular year, but that target increases every year. So you have to continuously improve the performance of your students at your site. And that's how in some of the schools that have already met AYP, this year already for the first time they did not. We have 17 in that predicament right now.
Because the standards are increasing.
And their student performance does not match that standard that has increased. So for example, this year it's 72% of the students in the school must be reading on grade level. And 78% must be doing mathematics on grade level. Last year it was 62 and 65. So it increases every year with regards to the performance of students.
And the idea is that it's building up to be 100% by 2014.
Correct.
Or is it?
No one's ever going to do 100%.
Well, you can't say that, and you can't believe that. I know districts that have gotten into the debate when they've tried to set the goal for how many students would accomplish some level, and of course at the end of the day they always have to say 100% because the counter to, if you set it at, let's say, 80%, so you're willing to write off 20.
But Mr. Hernandez, but our readers do want to know, because they've asked, where else has this worked? What's another district like our district where the approach that you're taking has worked?
Well, Mr. Hernandez has never been superintendent of a district, but he has been an area director of 90 schools in Dade County, in which he inherited, I think it was 29, 29 F and D schools, and he moved all of them up,
Doing this.
doing exactly this.
And when I became the state regional director, I had 31 DNF schools that were in categories of correct to and intervene, and every single school but one improved. Some went straight to A's from F, and I had 2 intervene schools that got totally off the list in my schools in the Broward, Dade, and Palm Beach County.
Did you ever encounter anything like the protests you've had here? While you were doing that, did you ever have parents say to you, what the heck are you doing?
You know, one of the things that I really feel has contributed to the protests and
basically saying is look, and I know this because I was a principal for half my life,
Sure.
there are a lot of decisions that are school-based decisions, and there are still a lot of decisions that are school-based decisions.
But I mean, I read the questions. A lot of the questions that had to consult your principal. If you read enough of them, there seemed to be kind of a theme there, where if there was perhaps what you might consider miscommunication. So instead of saying consult your principal, couldn't you have said, well, in fact, that's not a district requirement, or I mean, sort of.
Well, again, I think you already slapped us pretty good for that, and I think that it was. I do appreciate the fact that Mr. Dow did call us and give us an opportunity to fix it, and we did.
We've heard from a number of parents of exceptional student
Education.
children that the changes are either going to hold their children back or they won't be in sync with their individualized plans.
Well,
is that a legitimate concern?
Let me just answer that because I've been here and I see what's going on now, and then I would like to invite Mr. Hernandez to talk about it in detail. One of the things that the plan that we put in place with the efforts of Mr. Hernandez have ensured that in every school we have RTI, which is Response to Intervention, which is a program designed to keep students from getting into the overclassification of ESE status, because that's one of the complaints of the minority community, actually of any community, that sometimes students get stigmatized and placed into ESE categories when they really shouldn't be there. We also have an ESE coordinator. We have coaches that are both in reading, math, and science in every school. The provision of that ensures that the students are getting the necessary real-time services that they need. And we didn't have that type of arrangement before. Everything was pushed more down to the school at the beginning of the year, and we were pretty light in terms of what we were able to do. But with that in mind, I'll ask you, Mr. Hernandez, to address specifically the issue of the ESE student.
There's two things. First of all, the individual educational plan addresses the independent instructional level of the child and how the goals and objectives that are collaboratively developed at the table with the parent and the staff of the district and the school are done based on the needs of the child, where the child is and where they need to go. There's also a part of instruction that for ESE students, you need to expose them to grade level material and grade level instruction. One of the reasons why we struggle so much with making sure that our students are exposed to the general educational program is because ESE students that stay totally in a non-general ed classroom are not exposed to grade level instruction to the frequency that they should. So this opportunity in most of our schools, you see the federal government and the state government are moving towards inclusion because it does allow for the student to access the grade level instruction and be provided the differentiation of the non-grade level instruction and move more towards their instructional level.
Sure, but so you're saying that these parents don't have to worry. What are you going to say in kind of straightforward English? That
I'm a parent myself, Randy. I would never tell a parent not to worry, because as a parent you need to worry always about your child. I will tell the parent that if they have an individual situation where their child, they're seeing an issue that needs to be taken care of, that they contact their school and schedule an individual educational plan.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we ran a letter to the editor from just such a parent who did just that and claims to have been told, I believe she was told by the administrators of the school, you can't do anything, our hands are tied.
I would say that that's a statement that if that's the case that occurred, then that's someone that's trying to use that parent for misinformation, because that's inaccurate. As a matter of fact, yesterday I was at a school with a parent meeting, and at that meeting there was parents that expressed concerns with regards to their children. Today, as we speak, their staff already being deployed to that school to help them with the response to intervention strategies.
Are these ESE parents?
Yes. So any parents that express concerns and that we are aware of it at the district, we are very action-based at the district, and we deploy services to the school right away. So what I would invite the parents to do, I've given my email to all of the parents that I have addressed. I included in all of my communication. We have, at the moment I get an email from a parent with a concern, I forward it to the appropriate staff to take the action. Now, it's very important.
Give that email right
Sure.
now, since we're here.
It's Jeffrey, JEFFREY, .Hernandez, HERNANDEZ, at palmbeach.k12.fl.us. And something that's very important is when they do write the communication, they need to tell us the school and the student. Because when an email comes in and it's general in nature and says there's problems with the ESC students, I can't address it unless I know where to send the support. So if they're specific, then we can then in turn deploy the support to the students.
Okay.
The other side of that is gifted, parents of gifted students are saying, well, when you give us this schedule and these assessments, you're really holding us back, and it's an impediment to our children learning everything that they could learn. What's the response?
Well,
to that?
there's a concern now that will be a different concern shortly when the standards change, because we're going from a spiral curriculum where concepts get taught, repeated over year to year, to a step curriculum where concepts will be taught in 1 year, and if you miss that year, you miss that concept. And this is one of the fallacies with, jumping ahead in a textbook, which has been largely the methodology that's been used in Palm Beach County. The other problem is with all advanced classes, whether it's gifted or advanced placement or just an advanced class in a high school, much less the advanced placement, is that the FCAT covers an integrated set of concepts. In the case of reading, it's clusters, and in the case of math, it's strands. And I just happen to know that in math, it's measurement, numeration, probability, algebra, and geometry. So if you're taking a course in high school like algebra, unless you have a terrific memory in measurement, numeration, probability, and geometry, when you get to that FCAT, or unless the teacher does some type of review, you're going to be, somewhat at a disadvantage. And this is going to be exacerbated if the state, which they've talked about, insists that algebra return to the 9th grade, because right now we teach algebra in the 8th grade, and because you get a placement by selection, meaning that students take that, and some students wait till the 9th grade, we actually have better performance in the 8th grade than we do in the 9th grade. But if your 9th grade FCAT becomes an algebra test, and the student has taken algebra in the 8th grade, we have to make the assumption then that they're going to do well on it a year later, even though it's not fresh unless somebody reviews it. So this whole transformation of what the standards are going to occur relative to how they're constructed and what's in them in the next generational standards is having a huge impact on all of our instruction, and certainly gifted. Mr. Hernandez?
First of all, there's many things that need to be taken into consideration with regards to gifted. There's 2 formats that the state stipulates for gifted instruction. One is enrichment, and the other one is acceleration. And both of them are used simultaneously in a class depending on the skill of the student and where the child is. Right now, our scope and sequence does not stop the teacher from enriching nor accelerating the student. It's the format that they use to enrich and accelerate that's very important. As you know, the only thing that we require from the teachers is that the standards that are expected to be taught are taught. The method they use to teach it is individual to them based on the students they have in their classroom and based on the data that they have before them. For example, let's say that one of the areas that they need to teach is decimals. If I'm in a gifted class, I can enrich that, I can accelerate it within that standard depending on where my students are. In Palm Beach County, everyone administered a diagnostic. And the diagnostic test let the teacher know where my students came in as, where did they master, where did they already know, and where do they need to go. Well, with regards to that, the teacher can then use it to be able to accelerate within that particular area. Going up, for example, let's say 2nd grade is adding decimals, just as an example. And the student mastered that. Well, they can go to multiplying decimals, which might be a 3rd grade skill. And if they master that, they can go to dividing decimals, which is let's say a 4th grade skill. They can still compact and accelerate within the standard and enrich it. The only thing that we cannot do is say, we're going to give you a 4th grade book, and that's our form of acceleration.
Before we get to another question from the readers, I'd like to ask one that has had a piece of the last 2 or 3 answers, and that is the sense we get that, as you noted, some more fluent parents who believe that their kids are on the college track are saying in ways great and small, that the changes you've made are done mostly to benefit lower performing students and will wind up hurting what they see as their higher performing children, thus hurting their chances at college. Could you
Well,
address that?
absolutely. We intend to raise the ceiling and the floor. If we were only concerned about the floor, then we would simply do what we have largely been doing, and assuming that in the schools they would take care of themselves in terms of the ceiling. I posed a question recently at an academic meeting of how do I answer the question when an honors or an advanced parent or teacher or student asks, why is my student being introduced or taught the standards instead of the core, or both together? Because in an advanced placement class, the teacher is saying, I got X amount of time to teach the core, whatever that might be, the actual subject, and I don't have a lot of time to go back and revisit these standards. And the question was answered in this way: if you do well, and you are a smart enough kid, or you're the type of student that does well in the subject matter, in other words, you do get a good grade on your course, but you don't necessarily do well on standardized tests when you get ready to take the ACT, SAT. If you have the teaching and the training and the mastery in the FCAT standards, that is going to improve those college-ready tests that you have to take.
Could you address that point, Mr. Hernandez?
There's two different sides of what we're doing in the district, and I think we've only focused as a community on the issue of the embedded assessments and scope and sequence. But there's another part that's very important. We have been partnering with the college readiness initiatives this year in the district, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. First of all, the advanced placement participation and program offerings to our high schools have increased this year. We have made sure that the students that are willing to take the course and are able to live up to the expectation of the course with the right support are provided that opportunity. We also have not only partnered with the College Board to become a testing site for the SAT to afford the students the opportunity to have access to that exam so that they in turn are able to have the scores needed to get into college. But in addition to that, we have partnered with them for ongoing training for our teachers for rigor and relevance instruction. For example, 2 weekends ago, we had a conference here in Palm Beach County that was offered by the College Board that trained advanced placement teachers that were teaching language arts and social studies, but also trained teachers that were not teaching advanced placement courses, that were teaching regular and honors, so that teachers would be utilizing the same strategies of rigorous instruction in all level of courses, as we again try to do what Dr. Johnson's referenced as the floor and the ceiling. The other thing is, we are the first district that is going to be a testing site for the SAT during the day come in April. That's a partnership of high-end students as well, and looking at the high performance and bringing all of our students to that level. In April, we will be able to offer the SAT for the first time during the day for all of our students in our junior and senior levels.
During the week.
During the day.
During the school day.
The school day,
Not
right.
on a Saturday.
No, during the school day.
Which has
right.
been for transportation and work, et cetera, a problem for many of our students. But
Right.
so now they're going to take it during the school day.
Correct. In addition to that, we have also developed the issue with the college readiness. As you know, the state defines college readiness by the score on your SAT, ACT, or CPT, which are the 3 exams that the students at the high school level are eligible to take. And currently, what we have done is that we are preparing our students for that by we have a system of preparatory performance for them. For example, they have a technology support program that we put into place this year called E2020 that allows the parents at home to access support for their child to prepare them for those high-level exams that get them into college. In addition, we're in the process of planning our support programs for those students that are in the advanced classes. we will be launching a Saturday program for our students that are in the advanced placement courses so that we can provide them the academic support that they need to ensure that they're being successful in acquiring the skill that they're getting during the week in the classroom and reinforce some previously taught ones so that when the exam comes in May for advanced placement, they're able to do that. So we're not only focusing on the interventions, we're also focusing on the enrichment. As a matter of fact, one of the parents that we spoke to recently that is in support of the movement said what you're doing is accelerating, not remediating. And that's very important to keep in mind. Our goal is to not have to be playing catch up for instruction, but to lay the foundation at the elementary schools in a strong method so that by the time they get into the high school in a feeder pattern approach, they are where they need to be to continue excelling academically.
This question is coming in various ways, but it essentially says teachers have complained they're being turned into robots. How do you respond to that?
Mr. Hernandez, I'll let you address that.
I would respond to that would be a statement if the teachers were required to use the lesson plans on the given day and were required to teach the method in the same way that we have designated, and that's not the case. The only thing that teachers have to be responsible for is to teach the standard.
And everybody doing the same thing, same time, same place, etc. The reality is that if there is a one-size-fits-all, it is the expectation that all students will receive the Sunshine State Standard benchmarks from the beginning of the year until the time they take the test. Now, the question is, and it has always been this way, how many of them are going to get covered? In some cases in years past, they probably didn't get covered or didn't all get covered. And in other cases, they may have been omitted altogether. The issue, though, with the teacher is that they always have had the ability to teach using the styles and the variations that they would have from class to class. The main thing is that those standards be taught, to what Mr. Hernandez was saying.
And that the data drives their instruction. That's the most important thing. That there is an objective method of having the data drive the instruction in the classroom so that the needs of the students are being met.
Just a quick follow-up. What about the tests? Who's writing the tests?
The exams are done by various ways, and I'll share it with you. First of all, we have an item bank of 15,000 questions that we have in the district that has been with us for 5 years. And the questions get updated every year. It used to be called Princeton Review. The company was now renamed by Core K-12 because it was purchased by a different individual. And I think that in itself has brought the impression that it's a new thing, and it's not. It's still Princeton Review. It's just like when Bank of America sells to Regions, and the name just takes over the same process. What that does is that those questions that are there are linked to the item specifications. And I'll explain that language because I know that's hard. The districts and the teachers receive how the standard that is expected to be learned by the student has to be applied. Because, for example, I could teach addition, 2 plus 2. And the child, if you give them 20 problems of 2 plus 2, 3 plus 5, they're able to do it in isolation. That's not the standard of the state. The standard is taking that skill and being able to apply it in the opportunities that the state stipulates they must be able to do that. So the item specifications that we receive by grade tell us this particular skill has to be able to be applied by a third grader like this, and like this to determine mastery of the skill. So the questions that we have in our embedded assessments and our common assessments and our diagnostics are ones that are linked to that application. And why sometimes the students are successful in, let's say, their homework, they're able to add it. And when they get to the embedded assessment, they're not. It's because that application and that transfer of the knowledge is difficult. But it's important to know because you need to be able to know if the child can take a low complexity activity to a high complexity activity of application. The other thing is for reliability of the exam, every standard that you assess has to have a minimum of 4 questions because 1 question does not tell you if the child has mastered that. And so in this development of the assessment, you take all of that into consideration. If you're teaching a particular skill, that there's 4 questions in different parts of the assessment to make sure that the child has clearly understood that. Once the team at the district office, the curriculum team, puts together the assessment based on the questions from the item bank that are aligned to the specifications, it goes to Core K-12. They have a team that reviews it for reliability and to make sure that all of the items that are there are not only balanced, but that they're not biased, and that they ensure that they are correct for the specification. Core K-12 is the system that we
That's just
have
an
that we use for the item banks. That is the company
Does
that
the teacher write the test, or does
the district writes the test.
Well, the district has created the common assessments and now has created the embedded assessments, but we pull from this item bank that was developed over the years. And to the schools that want to have their own school assessment, that is available to them. Because we would want them to create a test that has valid components, reliable components, sociometric accurate components in it, and that's the reason that we
Let's see if we can
provide that.
simplify this. People at the district write a test. You send it off to some place that verifies that, yes, this is a test that's an accurate measurement of where you want students to be.
Correct.
It comes back, the district gives it to the teachers who give it to the students.
Correct. Now, in the option of flexibility that they have last week, they have 3 options, and that's very important because even last night at the parent meeting that I was at, there was still some confusion with regards to that. So I want to touch base on that because that's key. We do that process, and we upload the test to the system. In the current options that they have, the school has the authority to say, I'm going to use this assessment that was created, or the test that was created by the district based on the item specifications. I'm going to use it based on the timeline that has been established. Or, as a school, I feel I need a couple of extra days to be able to do that, and they have that opportunity under the current flexibility that was provided. The second option that they have is the principal and their teachers can decide, I'm not going to use the test that was created by the district, but I'm going to create my own at the school, still using the item banks, because we need to make sure that the questions that are being asked are aligned to the specifications. And then they can create their own assessment and give it at the time that they feel is appropriate for their school. One of the things that we're doing is there's going to be training next week for those schools that want to use their own created assessments, because at the same time that the principals were requesting in certain schools to use their own assessment, they simultaneously requested training for their staff on how to create an assessment. So we're doing that next week so that those schools that want to do that are able to do that.
And why would the school want to do that? Why?
Want to do what?
Have that flexibility.
Not use what you, okay, if they're just choosing from the same bank of questions, and they have to meet all your deadlines eventually.
Well, Jack, I don't know all the reasons because I haven't talked to everybody, but I know one of the reasons, or it's the perception of the reason, is that the embedded assessment is given to the appropriate grade level at the appropriate time. You have some teachers in some classrooms that want to give embedded assessments that are at the instructional level rather than at the grade level. So in
What's
other
the
words,
difference?
well, the instructional level is wherever they are instructing the students. So in other words, if I'm in a, pick a grade level, and that's the grade level, that's what the embedded assessment would be measuring. But the instructional level could be where I'm instructing, which would be farther on than that. Now, of course, there's disadvantage to that, and that is that if that's not covering what's ultimately going to be assessed, down the line, then you could be teaching something that's really off point.
You could be teaching to the wrong test.
No, sir, we're not teaching to the test, because something that's very important.
No,
I'm glad you made that
I'm
comment.
teaching to the wrong test.
No, but I'm glad you made that comment. You're so
Because teaching to the test has been another criticism.
correct. The Sunshine State standards that are expected of a grade level are the test, because the FCAT is a measurement to assess understanding and acquiring of the skills that the students are supposed to adhere to in that given year. So if you're teaching to the standards, you don't have to teach to the test, because the students will automatically be able to apply them at the time of the exam.
You're saying one leads to the other.
Correct. Now, as a matter of fact, there is a law that does not allow you to practice for FCAT testing this year. And it came about through the same Senate Bill 1908 that changed the high school accountability. It says districts are not allowed to practice to the FCAT until 2 weeks before the exam, where you do a conditional preparation for the student so that they're not in shock when they get to the exam. What we're doing is not practicing for the FCAT because we are assessing what's being instructed. When you practice for the FCAT, you give an exam that's not assessing what you're instructing, it's assessing what the child's supposed to learn in the entire year. There's a lot of commercially developed practice FCAT tests that people use throughout the state, and that's what the state says you cannot do during the instructional year. You can only do that as a preparation for condition 2 weeks before. What we are doing is assessing the learning that took place in the classroom to make sure that each child has been able to master the skill, and if they've not, what remediation or intervention I need to provide, and if they have, how do I enrich it and accelerate it to take them to the next level. Now, before you say that, because it's very important for have a clear understanding for the public, because they have this question and we get it often. It's very important to understand that skills have to be maintained and revisited. Part of the continuous improvement model is that I am able to ensure as a teacher that my child and my students in my classroom have maintained the skills they learned the previous year. So, for example, in the embedded assessments, we put what's called maintenance questions in there, which are questions to make sure if I am teaching at 3rd grade decimals multiplication, for example, that's what I've taught this cycle, correct? The child should have been able to maintain from the previous year the addition of the decimals. So in the embedded assessment linked to that same standard of decimals, there might be one question on addition of decimals. You didn't teach that during that cycle, but it's important to make sure as you drive your instruction to know how many students in your classroom actually maintained that skill that's called foundation from the year before.
At the risk of oversimplifying, would it be accurate to say then that you are giving more tests to try to find out if students aren't learning?
I wouldn't say we're giving more tests because teachers were supposed to test in this format anyway as part of the instruction. Any instructional program you implement in a district or in a classroom requires that what is written to be taught is taught and is assessed to be able to determine that the students have mastered it. This is just a very reliable assessment that can be used to determine if the children are mastering the standards expected.
So why do so many parents think that their kids are getting more tests?
Because it's a name that's been given to a test. Most of our teachers in the district use the core K-12.
So maybe should you just throw out the term embedded assessment?
We would rename it if we could go back.
Why don't you?
How many of them are there? How many of
Well,
them
you
are
give
there?
them every 3 weeks, one every 3 weeks.
One every 3 weeks.
Yes, so you got a 30-week period, that's 10 tests.
And in some cases, it's not by week, it's by units. Like, for example, in this marking period, we're only going to upload 2 because the units don't end until the end of the 4th week. So that's another thing that sometimes they say, well, we're giving so many tests, well, maybe the unit that was taught only had a certain number of days,
Let me jump
and then
in.
you assess it.
At the beginning of the year, we had the FAIR, the SRI, the diagnostic, the embedded assessment, and it was the plethora of all these tests, with the brand new test, embedded assessment, being the one that got, blamed for you're testing too much.
So those first 3, those are all acronyms for tests that kids
Some
are
of them,
taking anyway?
yes, and some of them are required by the state.
For example, FAIR. FAIR, it doesn't have a definition, it's just called FAIR. It's a reading assessment, and there's no way to bring it. It's a reading assessment that the state established this year that all districts across the state had to administer to your correct to and your intervene schools, which that's where we administered it, to our correct to and intervene. That was a reading test. The SRI test is an assessment to get the lexile of the student, how the reading level of the student, so that they can select their books from their library in the classroom, because the books in the classrooms are a lexile to the ability of the child to read.
There's that wording.
Lexile is the level of reading.
Okay. Because the books are matched.
Right. So that SRI gives them that. In addition, those students that are in our intervention programs in reading need that Lexile score for their small group instruction and their reading libraries. In addition to that, we had our diagnostic, which we've been administering in Palm Beach now for, I think, 6 years, if I'm not mistaken. In addition to that, as part of the regular classroom instruction, let's say that embedded assessments were not here. The teachers would still need to assess during that same cycle of time what they've taught. So the fact that it had a name and it had an identity created this version of we're over testing.
So-
Every year, at the beginning of the year, they do all of these
So
assessments.
who thought up the name embedded assessment?
Actually, we tried to align it to the language of the state to make sure that when the state came to visit, because as you know, they're coming to our schools to visit. We've already had.
So this is a name you had to think up to please somebody from the state?
No, this is the name that was aligned so that when the state came to the school,
Right.
they would not be hearing a different title and say, well, you're not doing the formative assessments. We are.
So you'd be in trouble if you just had called it a test?
No, it'd be not every. Just like right now, having
Right.
issues with regards to understanding what that assessment is. When they would come in and talk to a teacher and they say, "Are you doing formative assessments?" They could say no, and they really are. You understand what I'm saying?
We were going to call it the Palm Beach Post-Play. We didn't think that would
Go ahead, Laura.
I'm wondering, what percentage of teachers do you think were assessing kids roughly every 3 weeks or 4 weeks last year? Because the ones who contact me feel like this is more testing to them as well.
Well, define what they're doing. I think that most teachers that really want to know how their students are doing, either in a very formal or informal way, assess every day. And that can be, how many of you here did your homework? Raise your hand. I mean, just that simple of a thing. So whether it's paper and pencil or turn in your work, okay, everybody got to work. That's a form of assessment. And of course, there's paper and pencil quizzes, there's spelling tests, there's little writing things they do. You know, it just depends on the level. So I can't imagine, I mean, as a principal for 25 years, when I would open up a teacher's grade book for the 9 weeks or whatever period it was, there would be just a whole list of assessments all the way across there, whether they be tests, quizzes, projects, you know, daily work, whatever it might be. What this does is assesses how they're doing on the Sunshine State standards. And we make the assumption, or I think a lot of teachers do, that if I'm teaching the textbook, they're going to do fine on the test. And in many cases, they do kind of, sort of, you know. But in too many cases, they don't. And what you have in the program that is in place right now is a very systematic, strategic way of ensuring that the standards are covered and that the teachers are knowledgeable in the standards, that the materials, the resources, and this tremendous amount of support that is real-time support. I mean, and there is no joke in the past. I mean, one of the administrators said a problem like, you know, we were talking about a particular problem, that wouldn't have got identified till the end of the semester. Now it's identified and it's dealt with in 24 hours.
As a matter of fact, through the instructional review processes that we do at the school and the constant support from the district to the sites, the principals request support from our district every day. I'll give you an example. Principal can do a walkthrough and the teacher says, you know, I really need help with the experiments and the hands-on activities I'm doing. Principal immediately sends an email to the system of support that's needed. Someone is there immediately to support that teacher on how to effectively do the experiment if they need support. You could have a brand new teacher that just came on board to the district and is teaching elementary and has never taught reading before. We deploy support immediately. We have teachers that were teaching kindergarten and now they have a 4th grade assignment and this is new to them, and we deploy support to that school to help. So one of the good things about everyone having a concept of being on the standard in that particular cycle is that we're able to support the teachers in many aspects.
Let's deal with that just quickly. You referred to the kindergarten teacher who might have a 4th grade class now, and this, of course, is part of the change in which elementary school teachers move.
No,
now,
that's
right?
part of every year a principal changes their teachers from grade level. The grade level assignment is a principal decision as to, like, when I was a principal, you were teaching kindergarten, but I see a strength in you that might be able to help my 4th grade students based on the need, so I move you to 4th grade.
But you do have another part where you do have elementary school students moving.
Correct.
You're talking about departmentalization.
Right. That one of those jargon words. Can you tell us why you are having children that young move now? Why did you make that change?
The simplest reason, and there's a couple that are simple. One is that with the new expectations that are being placed on teachers, the new standards, really an issue of the capacity of the teacher to know all this. And the second major issue is support. When we go into a school and we want to work on math, for example, because this particular school is doing fine in reading but not so good in math, it is a lot easier to pull the math teacher out in a grade level and work with them than to have to stop the whole school and bring everybody in.
The other complaint we've heard about that change is that you lose class time because when you make kids that young move, it's 5 minutes at the end of the old class, 5 minutes to get settled in the new class, and then over time, they lose instruction.
Well, as an former elementary principal, middle school and high school principal, I can tell you that setting up classroom, transitioning in a self-contained classroom from one subject to another, or not even getting to the subject because you have preference, etc. This way you have the assurance that all subjects are covered. All subjects are covered with specificity and with rigor. The classroom is set up for all subjects because with science, for example, we expect labs at every level. And so if you're in reading groups and now all of a sudden you've got to stop all that, break it down, and go to the science, that's going to take a lot longer than it is to simply walk the students out and bring another group of students in and you're ready to go.
When I implemented departmentalization before, and this concern came up at the time of transition, we did an activity with teachers that really helped them understand. We actually had them in a self-contained class have a timer. When they finished one subject, the timer went on, and when they started the new subject, the timer went off. And then we had the departmentalized teachers. The timer went on when the students left the classroom, and the timer went off when the students got to the classroom. We actually found it was less because, for example, if I'm a self-contained teacher and I'm doing an experiment, by the time I pick up all the materials of the experiment that I just did, take all that out and bring in the math manipulatives and the math books and everything I need for that lesson, I might take more, if not the same time, than when I'm transitioning from one class to the
Another thing,
next.
Andy, too, is research shows this activity is very important for students. I mean, with everything that's being crammed into the elementary schedule right now, in some schools it's been very difficult for us to get to recess. Physical education is required, but activity, just that simple movement of changing classes is very healthy for students and especially for ESE students.
And also materials. When you have one science teacher in 5th grade, you can concentrate all of the materials you have in your building in science in one room. If you have everybody teaching science, then you have the wealth of materials divided into numerous classrooms, and in turn the students can benefit from having all of the materials and resources that they need at that particular time.
More others from the readers?
Yes. Do you think that most parents are unhappy with the changes or just some?
Well, I think that the majority of parents want to see their students have the greatest number of educational opportunities possible. In listening to teachers and principals and parents talk, for some time, I think that most are appreciative of what we're doing. Do they think that this was well communicated? Probably not. Do they think that this is stressful? Probably yes. Do they think that it is necessary? I think most do. Some do not. And I honestly think that of those some, they are in denial of what the real challenges are that lay ahead of them and their children, especially when you look at what's going on in this country and going on internationally.
So are you saying there are absolutely no tests that are unnecessary in this new system that you've devised?
I don't think that's the way to characterize it. Could you minimize the tests and have more in them? Sure, you could do that. Would you know as much about the students by doing it that way? Maybe not. But I look at it as raising my children and now my grandchildren. How often am I going to check on them? Now with my grandchild, I'm going to check on her every 30 seconds. That's a form of assessment because I don't want her falling in the pool, I don't want her pulling something off the stove, etc. And I don't know why children in the classroom would be left to the assumption that just because I stood up there and taught it, that they learned it.
Well, in some cases, we'll say my daughter's in video production class and she got a test that her teacher says she just gave her because she's forced to give her by the district. She can assess whether she's getting the material by how well she does on the video that she's supposed to do in the class, but she was forced to give a written test, so she just made up a test by testing them on how well they remember the handbook guidelines that you have to use for video technology in the school.
But that's a perfect example of something that's very important for us to know, because in video production we don't have embedded assessments.
Right. Right.
So
She's forced to come up with a test to comply with the district standards.
no,
Yeah.
she would have to assess as a teacher to comply with her curriculum, not with the district standards, because the embedded assessments in video production, in mechanics, in any type of class that's not the core classrooms, they don't have embedded assessments. The teachers still have to assess as part of their instructional process, because that's how you determine whether the student is able to do what you've asked them to do. Authentic assessments in those classrooms are very important. No one has told the teachers of those classrooms that they have to have a paper pencil test. They have to have assessments in their classroom to determine mastery. For example, if I'm doing mechanics, the assessment might be go in the car and take out the battery and place a new battery. That's an assessment. And that's if that's your objective for that week, then that's what you would be doing. The embedded assessments are only in the core classrooms because those are the ones that are linked to the standard of the intervention, remediation, and enrichment that we need based on that given year.
Which is reading, mathematics, writing, and science at this point.
And social studies.
Laura, I don't know.
What does all of this cost the district, including Mr. Hernandez's salary? People want to know.
Well, let's set Mr. Hernandez's salary aside for just a moment. The Palm Beach County School District, again, is the highest performing district in the state of Florida among the urban 7. We have maintained a balanced budget. We have not had layoffs. We have not had furloughs, and we have not cut salaries. This morning I heard on the news that St. Lucie County is number 1 in foreclosures. Broward is number 4, and Dade is number 6, and we are at 24. People get foreclosed on because they lose their jobs. We did not put anybody on the street, and we are the largest employer in Palm Beach County by a factor of 3. So we, in my mind, have saved a lot of economic wear and tear on this community by living within our budget, and we have cut $100 million out of our real budget in the last 2 years. There was a lot of screaming to our south by the superintendents and boards about the budget and beating on the legislature, and all they got out of that was some punitive legislation directed at all of us, quite honestly. The stimulus money has been a huge benefit at this point in time. The stimulus money is designed to build capacity in the school. It is very explicitly given not to provide compensation increases because it's going to fall off in 2 years. So what we have done in Palm Beach County is take that stimulus money and invest it in the training and the support that would allow our teachers and our school administrators to have self-contained capacity, so when the stimulus money goes away and the capacity of support goes away, they're going to be in a position so we can go, that we can say to them, okay, now go out there and get the job done. Prior to that, it was not reasonable to expect that.
So how much did it cost? And the question was, how much did it cost?
What is the stimulus dollar?
Well, we received in stimulus Title I dollars $37 million. And in IDEA, we received another 30. All of the stimulus dollars are not for just this type of process. The stimulus dollars are used in many. There is no price on it because you can't price or quote instruction. Because the price could be, we've had teachers in the classrooms that have been added, we have support that has been given to the schools, but that has nothing to do with this process. It has to do with the student needs and how we as an educational institution have to meet those needs. If you asked the number, I couldn't tell you that because there is no exact way of determining everything that's being done to help the students, how much that's costing.
And your salary?
That's...
Well, it is an appropriate amount for the level of expectation that was given to the chief academic officer. The public education is an extremely important function in any community, and it is in this community as well. And I think that when you try to cheapen it, that devalues its worth to the community.
Not trying to cheapen it, just trying to
Just
get a
want a
number.
number.
No, well, the number is $180,000. That's his salary. But you know that. I mean, that's been widely advertised.
Single readings.
it is not that competitive to other districts.
And the position that I hold and the responsibilities that I have under my position, when you market that across the different areas of districts that have a position like mine, it is very marketable with regards to that price.
Mr. Hernandez, you live in Miami-Dade County
Yes, I do.
right now. Do you plan to move to Palm Beach County? Your kids, I believe, are not in school yet.
Yes, they are.
Will
My
be.
son is in school.
Okay. Do you
Well, let
plan-
me
do
answer
you-
that.
Do you plan to move here so that your kids will go through the system that you are changing?
I'm going to answer that in two ways. First of all, my kids will go to a public school because I believe in public education. Second thing is, my lifestyle right now requires the support of my mother and my mother-in-law, because my wife and I both have jobs that are very time consuming. In my house right now, my mother-in-law lives to my right-hand side and my mom lives to my left-hand side, and my house is in the middle. My children come home from school and my mom and my mother-in-law, who are retired, take care of them. My wife and I both commute very long distances because my wife works in Broward and I work in Palm Beach. And so in turn, we prefer to commute but have our children be able to access the family support that they need when they get home from school. I prefer to commute so that my children have a better environment when they get home and have the support of my grandparents. My grandfather, my father, who's their grandfather, is the one that picks up my child from school every day. So based on that, I would tell you at this particular time, it is not foreseen that I will be moving from there, because I do count on that. I'm a very family-oriented person, and I am with my parents and my grandparents all the time. And so to do that, I need to be close to them.
And let me also point out that we have a number of administrators who live in St. Lucie County, Martin County, Broward County, and Palm Beach County. I think it's nice. I mean, in Dade County. I think it's nice when you can live in the county that you work in. I've always, enjoyed that privilege, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary.
Well, we have heard some people say, if you're going to make these policy changes.
And I'm going to answer that in one way, Randy. I have always had one philosophy as a teacher, as an assistant principal, as a principal, as an area director, as a state person, and now as a chief academic officer. What I would want for my own children is what I would want for every child that I am responsible for. When I was a principal, I would tell my staff, you do for those children in your classroom what you would want someone to do for your own children. Would I put my children in Palm Beach County? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, when I got offered the job in Palm Beach County, I had 2 other job offers that I was given. And I selected to come here because of the culture in this county, because of the superintendent's leadership and his belief in children, because of the board being a defender of children, and because of the educational excellence that was here and the moment of opportunities. Is this a great county? Absolutely. If your question is, would I put my children in Palm Beach County today? Absolutely. Can I move to Palm Beach County? Unfortunately, due to the family support that I need for my children for when they leave home and get home from school, and also for our jobs to be able to be flexible, I need to stay where I'm at.
If they're retired, couldn't everybody move?
Well, I wouldn't ask my parents and my grandparents and everyone else to sell their homes to move for that. My job selection or my career should not impact my entire family.
Art, you've told me before that public education is not for the faint of heart, and you have been through some previous upheavals here.
Yes.
How does this one rank with some of the others?
That's an interesting question. I have not thought about it that way. I mean, obviously, we had the Dreyfus issue, and we had the removal of the step, and we had PeopleSoft, and we've had this issue. I think this one is the most perplexing to me because we are doing, number one, we need to do this, and number two, we have to do this. The federal and the state expectations on all school districts are here, and I just don't think you can be in denial or that you can delay in getting started. But I do think, I thought you were going to say the genius of our democracy is public education, which is something I have long advocated. I don't know how you can live and breathe that and not see this as a moral imperative, and I have always felt like that is what we need to do. Mr. Hernandez, brought a set of skills and a an experience in large-scale reform that I felt like we needed in Palm Beach County. PeopleSoft was an issue that we didn't have to do. That was a good business decision, and there was some issues in that we had to work through. The others, are a long time ago.
Mr. Hernandez, if there seems to be an impression among some parents and teachers in the district that Dr. Johnson has brought in this young, arrogant, self-assured whippersnapper who is coming in and changing what was really pretty good, and why is he doing all this? How would you characterize yourself? I assume you think that's an unfair characterization.
I totally agree that it's an unfair characterization. And depending on who you speak to at what time and what experience they've had in that moment or what involvement, you would get a different perspective. I actually had a teacher last week that was part of our focus groups who, after the focus group, stood up and said, Mr. Hernandez, there's a myth out there about you and about your personality. And these 3 hours that I've spent with you have totally washed away all of those myths. And I would urge the public not to judge based on what they hear or what conversation they had without actually experiencing it. But to tell you, I'm first a human person. I have feelings. I'm very, very sensitive to the experiences that I go through and that others go through, and making sure that everyone's comfortable. I'm very detail oriented. I'm a type of person that I care to call someone and see how you're feeling. Are you okay? Do you need any help? I've always been very family oriented. I'm a good son, I'm a good husband, and I'm a good father. And if I had to be remembered by something, I would want to be remembered first by those three. And I'm also a good leader and a good professional, and most importantly, a good educator. My entire life, since I was 4 years old, sitting in my pre-kindergarten class, and actually I have my activity that I did when my pre-kindergarten teacher asked us to write what we wanted to be when I grow up. And I always said I wanted to be a teacher. I lived my entire childhood with a board behind my door and inventive students in my room playing teacher, because that's what I love to do. And I always say I am a teacher at heart. That's what I enjoy doing. When I was in the classroom and people would approach me to become an administrator, I got my degree and I started to lead in administration, but I always was a teacher at heart. As a matter of fact, being an administrator, I taught adult school at night just to be able to still stay in touch with the classroom, because that's what I like to do. Am I going to tell you that I have high expectations? Absolutely. Can high expectations be confused with arrogance or zero tolerance or insensitivity? I would not be able to answer that, because people's perceptions sometimes becomes their reality. Am I flexible? Absolutely, until it becomes a child's life. We have children in our hands. They are the most precious jewels of society. We can have flexibility with anything. We can have flexibility with the methods. We can have flexibility with the strategies, as long as they are meeting the needs of the students. What we cannot have flexibility with is the fact that every child in our district, every child in our state, in our society, in our nation, are entitled to a quality education. And so I'm not arrogant. I don't consider that. But again, why would I judge myself in front of everyone? I think that as people deal with me, as people interact with me, depending on what their passion is at that time. And sometimes people confuse the fact that I don't agree with them to be arrogant or not listening or being insensitive. I listen to everyone, and we have the right to agree to disagree, because all of us bring different experiences to the table, and those experiences lead you to your beliefs and your philosophies of action. I want to tell you that I respect the parents in Palm Beach County. I said that last night to the parents where I was at the school, and I've said it numerous times. The energy and the passion that's taking place in Palm Beach County right now, whether it's to express concerns or to celebrate the process, it's all about children's education. What a better way to have energy focus than to be talking about children's education. And I invite anyone to go into their classrooms. You ask me, would I put my kids in Palm Beach County? Absolutely. I have visited 89 schools since school started. And I would tell you, every single class that I walked into, you see academic focus. Every single class you walk into, you see teachers teaching, you see students engaged.
Are there any similar changes planned for next year that you know of already?
Well, I've already asked Mr. Hernandez to let us completely operationalize and execute with fidelity everything we put into place this year before we consider any changes for next year.
I'm going to ask because if you get to April and you do see things you want to do for next school year, are you going to communicate them?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We will start with the why, and then we will start the how. And I'll tell you why right now. The next generation standards are new next year. That's not something that we have control over. That's something that the state will transition fully into implementation next year. All of our scope and sequences this year have the current standards with the new ones embedded. We would have to make the revision, but at this time we promise you, we will make sure we communicate and show the why before the how.
Laura?
I'm wondering if you foresee any additional flexibility this school year that you're going to offer teachers and principals.
Well, as you know, I've brought together a group of administrators. It's about 50 people, around 20 principals, and the rest are in curriculum instruction and different areas of the district. And what we've done in that venue is to put issues on the table and work through them. I did the same type of thing when we were dealing with the PeopleSoft, and I reserve the right to make the final decision because that is, obviously the charge of the superintendent, but I do want to hear from all parties and I want to hear what their issues are. It was that task force that we pulled together that gave us the modification that you saw last week in the embedded assessment to allow schools to use school-based assessments. So I don't know. I mean, I think that you've got a number of principals and teachers right now who feel very, very strongly about we need to have a focused, centralized system to drive instruction throughout the district. And you have some schools that very much would like to be separatist and do their own thing. And I don't know that that's good for the students because of all the reasons that we've discussed today. But at any rate, we're willing to talk about that, so I can't really tell you that there's, there is or isn't.
Mr. Hernandez, you talked earlier about the number of schools you took from D and F status and off of intervenor and corrector status. How many of those schools actually improved in AYP, since that seems to be one of the huge focuses of these changes that you're making?
Well, first of all, as an assistant principal, I took 3 schools from low performing to A and met AYP. As a principal, I took my school from low performing to an A and met AYP in a school that was minority populated and low socioeconomic, 99% free reduced lunch. As a region director, I took my schools off the DNF list and we had them increase in their AYP performance. As a state regional director, a perfect example is John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy went from 60% AYP to 90% AYP. And in turn now they are on what we call borderline AYP targeted schools, which are so close that with extra support they should be able to move it. But I want to say something, and I'm so glad you brought up that question, because in too many conversations we've had this year in trying to inform the public of the requirements and the expectations, I want to make sure that everyone understands it's not about a number, it's not about what the law says, it's not about a federal requirement or a state requirement. It's about the kids. Data and statistics help us to help children, but it's about the children and making sure that they get everything they need to succeed. And one of the parents recently said, this is like when you go to a doctor. And if you relate education to going to a doctor, it's very important. The doctors are your teachers, and your students are needing different experiences. Some of us go to the doctor because we want to become more fit, or we want to eat more nutritious, or different things. When you go, you need to be able to know where you are and where you need to go. And there's periodic checks as to how you're doing with regards to your progress. I have a heart condition, and I have to go to the doctor regularly to see how I'm doing and whether what I am provided is helping me. The continuous improvement model requires that every certain number of times throughout the year we meet, we regroup, we have new data, we make decisions. Dr. Johnson mentioned the superintendent task force, which is also a component of how to get information after you're implementing something in the continuous improvement model. And we have focus groups that have already met with 121 schools, one principal, one teacher from every school, to get feedback and be able to look at the data on how to move forward. So is it an increase in AYP? Absolutely. Can you guarantee that we're going to meet AYP in every school this year. We anticipate and have that expectation, and we're working towards it. Is it going to be accomplished in 1 year? We couldn't sit here and guarantee, but we will have movement in the right direction.
It is our goal to do everything we can to hit it by next year.
I'm sorry, what was the answer to the question about the number or percentage of schools that you worked with that did meet AYP?
I couldn't give you a percentage number because I don't know that off the top of my mind right now. I can tell you that the majority of the schools that I've worked with have increased not only their school grade, but also their AYP designation. And the schools that were high performing, that were already A schools, because where I was the director of curriculum, I had a tale of two cities within my region. I had schools that were already AYP high performing, and schools that were low performing, the lowest in the district. And the schools improved, the ones that were in the low area. And my high performing schools, I had schools that went from 575 points after implementing the continuous improvement model to 670 points. Because the continuous improvement model is not just for low performing schools. It is to take the school from where you are and go forward.
Laura, are there major points you wanted to bring up before we close?
I think we mostly hit them. I think, unless I'm mistaken, I didn't hear that there was another large-scale school district that implemented kind of the same set of things that you guys are using here that you could look at as a pilot.
Well, the continuous improvement model is something that has been implemented not only in Florida, but across the nation. As a matter of fact, a year ago, Florida bought the license and created a Florida continuous improvement model. But it's still the same philosophy. The continuous improvement model is 8 steps, and the Florida continuous improvement model is 4 steps. But it encompasses the same components.
I'll give you two. One of them was brought to our attention in a recent consultant conversation, and that's Montgomery. And the other one that we know
Montgomery County, Maryland, Montgomery, Alabama.
Maryland.
Okay.
And the other one is Pittsburgh, who was one of the Gates contenders. And they have pursued this. And actually, they pursued it successfully.
Let's close with a question for both of you. At the end of the year, what should parents and students and teachers look at to judge you two on how this movement, as you call it, has succeeded?
Well, the last time I was in here, or the last time I had the conversation, Randy, with you and Jack, I think it was, maybe it was Jack asked me, how will I measure Mr. Hernandez's success? And I said the system will improve. You know, and I still believe that because it has to. The other goal I have, and I told the principals this a month ago, is I want this to be a joyous place to work. And I've had people recently tell me that you're not meeting that goal, Art, you know. So we're working on that. But I do believe that. I think that, you know, happy teachers make for happy students, happy principals make for happy teachers, and it goes down the line. But, you know, there's that old classic line, you want stressed out kids, you don't want happy morons. You know, I don't want to see it where we're just happy and we're not performing. So a certain amount of pressure, a certain amount of healthy stress to get the job done, to get trained, to be prepared is what we have to do.
And how will the public look and determine if, as you say, the system has improved?
Well, I think this needs to continue. In other words, we still need to stay on top in terms of our performance in A+, and I believe we will. And where the adequate yearly progress is concerned, we will need to see significant number of schools becoming or meeting AYP adequate yearly progress, which again for the viewers is the learning gains or the growth model. And ultimately our goal is for our district to completely meet AYP and obviously not have any F schools, which we don't have right now, and to take the education down to the student level. Every time, and you know, on a really sad note, within the last 2 to 3 weeks, we had a student, you know, stabbed in Dade County and killed. We had one stabbed in Broward County and then tried to commit suicide, and we had one shot and killed in Palm Beach County. And so what we do with our students academically, I believe, has a huge significance in whether or not they are going to be successful in their life, not only in terms of their academic pursuits, but in terms of their ability to deal with each other.
Mr. Hernandez, what are you going to look at for the public to evaluate you on at the end of the year?
The first thing is I would want our students to increase their student achievement and continue the upward momentum that we have in the district in Palm Beach County. I also think that it's very important this year, through our focus groups, through our task force, through our constant feedback sessions that we're having in parent forums and listening to the feedback, that we're able to integrate the standards that are required and also develop the whole child, because that's the most important thing, to make sure that our children are happy when they go to school, but are also able to meet the expectations that are required of them as an educational participant. I also believe in that as we continue to interact with our stakeholders, that the perceptions that are out there, I've never been an outsider. I have always been an insider, because I grew up and lived and worked in a district that I knew for 22 years. I started as an office employee and worked under many principals as their secretary, and ended up being an area director, which is the same thing as an area superior. And my goal this year would be that through the workings that we do with the community, with the teachers, with the principals, with the stakeholders, that I transfer from that word that they're using as an outsider to an insider, and that we can continue moving our district to the next level. We do have a new accountability this year, and statistics will show you that anytime you have a new accountability in the state, there is a drop in performance. For the first time, our high schools will transfer from 800 points to 1,600 points academically in their accountability. They not only have the traditional requirements, but they have new requirements of college readiness, graduation rate, accelerated coursework, so you have changes in performance. We're going to only one prompt in writing, where before we had two. We're going to one reader, where before we had two. So there's a lot of changes that have happened since July of this year at the state level and in the accountability process that changed.
So do you think that at the end of the year, because of all these changes, in addition, of course, as you mentioned earlier, the change in high school grading, that people are going to see in their minds lower school scores and consider your program
Well, let me speak
a
to
failure?
that. Let me speak to that. In anticipating of that, one of the things I asked staff to do, and with the viewing public, we looked at our performance as a state back to 1994, which is about a 16-year period. And every time the accountability standards were raised, you would see a significant spike in the number of failing or low-performing schools. And then, of course, the school districts would work their way back out of that. Then you would see the change. And, for example, the accountability started in 95. FCAT and school grades then came in 99. Learning gains were added in 2002. All students were counted in 2005. Science, math, and lower 25% were added in 2007. And this coming year, we have the new high school accountability. And in every case, there was a spike in the number of low-performing schools across the state. So, I mean, it would be reasonable to assume that that could occur. We are working and we are planning for that not to occur in Palm Beach County, because we want to beat the odds. But I think that's a very important, point to recognize, because for us to take this on at the very time that the standards are increasing, takes the risk that you're going to have people confusing which would have been a normal dip because of increased standards with some of the programs we put into place. So we're having to work overtime to deal with that. Are we going to be given some opportunity to make a little close, Randy? Just a good
This
time
is
to
really
do it? Yeah.
what it's
Well,
leading up to.
what I wanted to say is this. I really appreciate the fact that today, in my opinion, this has not been about Art Johnson and Jeffrey Hernandez. This has been about public education. And it is a very, very significant part of this community. Our community has prized public education. I know it, I feel it, I've lived it, I've been here, and I know right now there is some concern and there's some dissatisfaction with what people are feeling and what I think they believe they're seeing. I do think that the investment that we've put into the programs and the personnel and the training, the acquisition of Mr. Hernandez, and the embracing of what we see as increased expectations coming to us from the state and the federal government are going to be met with the necessary focus on our part for us to be successful, to make public education work. At this table today, that's what I feel. Now, on a personal note, you guys have lionized me and you've villainized me in the years that I've been in this district. And all of it's been, I'm sure, very fair at all ends. But today, I do appreciate that what I see as being on the table is the recognition that public education is significant to our community, and there are concerns right now, and you're helping us to identify what those are and get everything back on track so that we can not only be very proud of our system, but more importantly, we can get it to move forward.
I wanted to echo what Dr. Johnson said. First of all, I've shared this with Laura before and other reporters that have contacted me. I believe the media is a catalyst for information for us. And I really, really appreciate it. And that's why when you do contact us, we're there right away. Because you're helping us to get the word out and to clarify any misinformation that can be there. And we truly appreciate this.
I'd have to just give it back to you.
Okay, so, but we'll get the questions to
If it's a question that we cannot answer because we don't know the school or the location, we will put there to the reader again to contact their school administrator to get the information. In no way is that phrase not to answer the question, is that in some cases you do need the foundational information
you
to
can
be
do
able
this,
to
Jeff.
make
You
it.
could always just say, generally, the answer is this. Specifically, I would be able to give you more information
Absolutely.
if I had the specificity of the school.
Okay. Dr. Johnson, Mr. Hernandez, thank you for your time.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you, Laura. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
Done?
Great to meet you. Randy?
Art?
It was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you
Nice
so
to
much.
meet you too, sir.